Efron. Marty, what's your full name?
Martin. Middle name is Gerald Efron.
Where did you get that name from? Whose idea was the name?
Probably my mother's.
Yes.
I'm named after my mother's father and my father's father. So.
Oh, on both sides of the
right,
family.
So
that's great. I have had the same privilege, as a matter of fact. Did you have any nicknames or pet names?
I've always been called Marty all my life.
Yeah, that's okay.
And I pretty much, in an informal situation, go with Marty.
Okay. Now, tell us about your present family situation. Eva, of course, is your wife.
Well, Eva is my wife. We've been married for 17 years. She is one of the librarians here at Brentwood High School, and she's also president of the school library media section of the New York Library Association, which is a statewide position.
Obviously, there's a bit of pride there in her
accomplishments.
Yes.
Right? She's had this position. It's almost 2 years now, and it's starting to wind down.
So it's the two of you?
It's two of us at home now. Our 3 children are all grown.
Tell me about the kids. Tell me about their names, their birth orders.
Well, our oldest is Nancy. She's 30. She's going to be 36. She's an executive now with Bloomingdale's. She just moved over to Bloomingdale's.
Oh.
In fact, she's going to be involved with the opening of the new store in Walt Whitman.
Really? Oh, okay.
Later this summer.
Right.
And then there's David. He's just past 30. He's in the sales field. He works for Nextel in the communications area. And Dawn, our youngest, who's 25, who is a computer analyst. She runs the local area network for a large realty corporation in the city.
Oh, so she
has a degree in business computer information systems.
Oh, my goodness. So she's one of those on the cutting edge.
Oh, yeah. She's always on the cutting edge, developing new systems.
I would imagine she doesn't do the commute every day either.
No, the girls live in the city,
Uh-huh.
and my son lives out here on the island.
Uh-huh. I was thinking that in that field, very often people don't even have to go to the office every day.
Oh, she does.
She does, though.
She does because they depend on her. I guess the realty sales business has changed, and it's so computer oriented that the customers come in and work their way through computer programs before they look at sites. So she has to be there all the time. In fact, she's there a lot on weekends, making sure that everything's up and running.
You're telling me a lot about her personality then, too. I guess that suits her. That's the nature of her personality is to...
All 3 of our children were brought up with a work ethic.
Uh-huh.
And they've exhibited that in their lives. That's one of the reasons I think they're where they are today.
Do the interests or the talents of all 3 children fall into the areas where they are expressing themselves? That is, in their work, or are there other side interests or hobbies that they are engaged in?
Well, Nancy was a teacher at one time. She was trained to be a teacher. She taught music, and she decided that teaching wasn't for her, and she wanted to get into the business world. And she has found out over the years that because of her teaching experience, it's really helped her move along.
She's
able to train people. Yes.
Right.
Our son David, he's one of these natural salesmen. He's a kid who, when he was a youngster and had a paper route, he vowed to have every house on the route, and he did it.
Yes.
I know I had to help him deliver those Sunday papers. And Dawn is a tremendous personality, and no matter what she did, she'd be successful at. But she's really into computers. That's
Are there any grandchildren yet?
No, they're all into their careers.
Careers.
That's my greatest disappointment. No grandchildren.
Well, time.
And I said this on purpose because
Yes.
they're going to see this tape. I'm always needling them.
Are there any recognizable family traits that you see in the children that you know existed before they came along in the family that you?
You know, this is really strange because even I have come to believe that you don't really inherit the family traits. They're environmental, because Nancy and David are my children. And if you put Dave in the same room with Eva, you'd swear they were mother and son. Eva had adopted Dawn many years before I met Eva. Dawn is Korean. And Dawn and I think alike and are very much alike.
Yes.
So as a very close family, we really didn't need these natural births to
Right. So much of it
develop
has
these
been-
traits. It's all
has been
family
learned, right.
learned. Yes.
So how often do you see the kids, by the way? Do you?
Oh, we're a close family.
You are,
you know,
great.
So we're always.
Marty, where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn,
What part of Brooklyn were you born?
Flatbush.
Uh-huh.
I lived on,
Okay.
or actually, until I was about 4 years old. I lived on Ocean Parkway,
Okay. Yeah. I know
down
that
at Kings Highway,
area. Right.
and
You mind
just
my asking you when you were born?
yeah, 1937.
Okay.
I'm no longer young. And then we moved to Rockaway. Right at the start of World War II, we moved to Rockaway, which was an interesting experience.
Do you have any memories as a child of those early years, even before the move or at the time of the move to Rockaway?
Well, I remember living on Ocean Parkway. In fact, I remember the house we lived in, the apartment building, and I had an occasion to be in Brooklyn a few months ago. So I thought I'd drive down, and much to my surprise, it was one of those buildings that never changed. It
Really?
still looked the way I remembered it.
Really? That's great.
Right.
I would think that's an unusual.
But that whole area has been kept up.
Doesn't it look a little smaller now than?
Everything looks smaller.
Yes.
Everything looks smaller.
What was your mother's full name?
Mary Clayton.
That was her full name?
That was her full name.
Okay. And was she born in this country?
Yes, she was born in the Lower East Side.
Are you aware of any of the family history on her side of the family?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about what you know.
Her family came from Kiev in the Ukraine. She came from a family of rabbis on her father's side, and they migrated after 1905, I think. Her mother and father came to this country. There was a pogrom in 1905.
Yes.
They were fairly wealthy people, so they came to this country. And he actually went into business. Actually, he owned a string of fruit stores, fruit and vegetable stores on the East Side.
Really? This is
my grandfather,
Yeah. Okay.
And my grandmother, he was killed. I guess my mother, when my mother was about 15 or 16, he was killed pushing a young woman and her son out of the path of a car that was bearing down on them. And my mother watched that happen, so it always had an effect on her.
Oh, wow.
And
at 16, sure.
Yeah. It was about that age, as I recall.
How do you remember your mother as a child, as growing up? How do you remember her? What memories do you have of your mother?
Well, my mother and I, at a very early age for myself, had this agreement.
Mm-hmm.
We agreed to disagree.
Okay.
We never agreed on anything.
Isn't that interesting?
I was the oldest of 5,
but
she and I never agreed. We had some very long and interesting discussions as I got older.
Yes.
In fact, one of the last discussions I had with her, and this is always a funny story in our family. Eva laughs every time she hears this. When Geraldine Ferraro was nominated for the vice president, I thought that was the greatest thing that happened to this country, and I called her up. And here was a woman that was anti-Roosevelt, in her day. So very conservative.
Yes.
I don't understand how she was claimed to be a Republican her whole life, but she was. And I went on, and she tore into me. We had a battle over the phone.
No kidding.
Finally, I said, "Look, Ma, there's no point in us discussing, so pay your dues to the John Birch Society, and you'll be happy, but I'm voting for Geraldine." And that story is still told in the family.
Yes. What were your mother's interests? What did she do? I know women in those days were very busy with family things.
That was it.
That was it.
She was a consummate mother. Okay. Stay at home, made sure my father had his dinner. The kids were dressed properly for school and taken care of.
What was your father like? Now tell me a little bit about him.
My father was a Damon Runyon character.
Really?
Yes. My father was a plumber. Although when he met my mother, he told her he was a sanitary engineer, and she fell for it. My father was, I'm 6 foot tall and a pretty big guy, as everybody knows. My father stood 5'7", never weighed more than 155 pounds his whole life, and was always strong. And
amazing. Yeah.
He worked on all of those buildings in the city, all heavy construction. In fact, he was one of the first non-Indians up on the Empire State Building.
Really?
bringing
With
up
the
the waste pipe
with the steel workers
with
up
the
there.
steel work behind the
Oh,
steel
my.
workers.
Did he often stop and say, "I worked on that building"?
Oh,
when I went?"
he always made
Yeah,
sure he told us. I think he
yeah,
built, it was involved in every apartment house that was built in Brooklyn from
really.
1928 or 29
Yeah.
on.
Uh-huh.
But he was a real character, and he had friends that were characters. You know, I grew up with his friends. I remember he had friends named Tin Ears, the guy that never stopped talking. Roller skates.
Really?
He had
Yeah.
another friend called Gloves. He was a plumber also. He wore gloves so he didn't ruin his manicure.
Yeah. Oh. Was yours a small family? Or
No, we had 5 kids. I had
Yeah.
3 sisters and a brother. I was the oldest.
What's the most endearing memory you have of your father?
Oh, a lot of endearing
Yeah.
memories of my father.
Could you name one? Could you tell us about one?
He just, so many. I think one of the endearing points was him at my college graduation when he forgot to, the old-fashioned cameras. You had to move
Yes.
the film ahead.
Yes.
Well, he took about 30 pictures,
Yes.
but they all came out on one frame.
Yes.
And,
Every father,
he got all
every father
excited.
who ever
Yeah.
listens to this will identify
Right.
with that panic at that
Right.
moment when you realize
That was it. I was the first
Yeah.
to graduate,
Uh,
and of course, I think with my sisters, and I call this endearing because I think I have this trait. I'll probably will find out. When my sisters would go out with some guy, these guys were always wonderful,
Yes.
he was always buddy with them. And then when it'd get serious and get close to the wedding, he learned to hate them. Until the day of the wedding, he was ready to kill.
Oh, jeez.
And then after that, they were okay.
They were okay.
But he was a real character. There were 5 of
That's
us,
right, you
3
did.
sisters and a brother.
Okay. Where are you in the
I'm the
birth
oldest.
order? Okay. What did you learn from your brothers and sisters? Maybe you can single out a brother or a sister who taught you something.
Well, I think it was a collective learning. Being the oldest, I was somewhat responsible.
Sure.
And involved, with the kids as they were growing up. And that helped me later on as a parent.
Sure.
Because I had that experience.
What was it like growing up in your family with all those brothers and sisters? And by the way, how many were brothers and how many?
1 brother, 3
3
sisters.
sisters. Okay.
During the early years, we lived in Rockaway,
Mm-hmm.
about a block from the beach, block and a half from the beach. And during the nice weather, we all spent most of our time on the beach. So it was basically, seeing that they got to the beach and back. But we were a close group. I remember as a youngster, I had rheumatic fever, and my legs were in pretty bad shape. But I was a good hitter. So I would get chosen for a team if I would hit and my sister, the next youngest sister, would run for me, because she was very fast.
Oh, is that
So
great?
we were kind of a team growing
you
up when
bet.
we were,
Yes.
she was just a few years younger than I was. So, that was always an interesting experience.
Yes.
You can play if Shelley plays. She gets to run for you.
Marty, were there any adults were there any adult influences outside of family members that played a part in your growing up?
Well, as a youngster, you're active in local organizations. And I was active in the Boy Scouts, and there were 2 brothers that I always admired. One, they both went to City College. They were on the wrestling team, very educated. And they were both, one was the scoutmaster and the other one, the younger brother, helped. And they took us to a lot of events at City College, a lot of events in the city that kind of opened up the world of New York to me at a very early age.
Yeah, role models.
Very good role models. But probably the person that had the greatest influence on me was, I had an uncle who died at a very early age, but he was in World War II. And he was involved in a number of major battles.
Oh.
And he was the person that believed you can do anything you wanted to do. Just go out and try your hardest. And he's the guy that taught me to play ball, although my father would always be there when he came home from work and pushed. Of course, there's one thing that aggravated me was with him when I was a young kid. this was the days before dishwashers. He said, when I first went to the Army, I had to do KP, wash dishes and all. Why do you get up from the table and walk away and let your mother do it?
Oh,
You've got to do it.
really?
Well, my mother caught on to that.
Uh-huh.
And for the next 7 or 8 years, that's what I did until the next came along.
You mentioned World War II. Do you have any memories of that period?
Oh, yes, a lot of memories. I lived in Rockaway, which is right on the water. And believe it or not, I saw a ship sunk as a very young, as a 5, 6-year-old, I think. I was about 6. On the beach, we saw an explosion one evening, torpedoed, which was very common.
No kidding.
Oh, you could see a lot. We saw a number of wrecks over the years. We always had the blackouts because of
this would have been a German submarine off the coast of Rockaway. That
it was off the coast of Long Island. Yeah, it was a few miles out. A very clear night. We were down on the boardwalk, no lights. You couldn't smoke, and all of a sudden we saw a flash. And then next day, the Daily News had
remarkable, yeah.
But growing up during the war, of course, we did our thing with collecting tinfoil and newspapers and junk.
Yes.
And for the war effort, buying the saving stamps. And I remember when they taped all of the windows in school, with something similar to masking tape so the glass wouldn't shatter.
Yes.
Yeah. It was very interesting.
And the coupons.
The ration coupons. Because part of my job was to do some of the shopping at the local grocery store, bring it home in my wagon. Right. And there were the coupons, the ration coupons.
So much meat a week or whatever.
Well, yeah, you'd get, I remember you can go down and you could buy I don't think more than a pound or 2 of sugar at any. I think we were allowed 2 pounds of sugar every so often because of the size of the family. But these ration stamps were guarded.
Yes. Oh, I can remember the stamps on the window of the car for gasoline too.
Oh yeah. My father put his car up on blocks for the duration because we had public transportation in the town. He worked in the shipyards for most of the war. Yeah. So we were able to do that. I remember going down to the shipyards with him when every once in a while when he would want to go down and collect his pay.
In Brooklyn?
No, it was the Todd shipyards in Hoboken.
Oh.
I think there are people that would watch this and remember where they were building Liberty ships. Oh. Uh-huh. And later victory ships.
How did you, jumping ahead a little bit, how did you become an educator?
That was interesting.
Who influenced your choice of that career?
That's interesting. By about 1951, we moved to Babylon, where I went to high school. Mm-hmm. And I was involved in activities in high school and part of the Leaders Club. And one of the teachers, one of the coaches, broke his leg. He was teaching these junior high phys ed classes. And he wanted a couple of volunteers from the Leaders Club during their study hall to come out and work with him, with the kids, the younger kids, teaching them and going through, he would explain to us what he wanted done and we would do it.
And this is in junior high school?
I was in high school.
You were in high school.
Babylon is, and it still is, a junior, senior high school. So we were working with the 7th grade kids and I was having so much fun. I decided then and there I wanted to be a teacher.
All right.
And I came home and announced it.
This is the strongest argument I can think of for teachers using kids to work with lower grades. To role model and to almost a mentoring kind of program too for kids.
Definitely is.
Yeah, you create future teachers.
And at that point, I didn't know what I was going to teach, but I enjoyed working with young kids.
Young people. When during that period, let's say when you were in high school or even earlier, perhaps you have some memories of who your best friends were.
Yes. One of my best friend through high school was a fellow by the name of Sid Hockheiser, who was the younger brother of Marty Hockheiser, who was a guidance counselor. And I knew Marty all through high school. He was just a year or so older. In fact, Marty was a great track star at Babylon in the early 50s. He was a county champion in a number of events, as I remember. And his brother Sid, who now lives in California, and I were very close friends through high school. And there were a few other friends.
So you then still have contact with
him? I haven't had contact with him. I only have contact with him through Marty every once in a while. While we've lost contact because I went into the Navy, then he went into the Navy and was stationed on the West Coast, and he really never came back. But there were a few people. In fact, I could, you talk about contact in your early years. This is me jumping ahead because I know I'll forget the story.
Go.
I'm on a number of scholarship committees in Babylon and West Islip, and I was over at the Village Hall in Babylon about 2 months ago, and we were having a scholarship meeting because one of the members is a trustee of the village, in his office, and I'm sitting outside waiting for the meeting to start. This fella's standing there looking at me. He says, "I know that voice. Marty, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Remember me?" And I recognized his voice. Fran. He and I had apartments in college opposite each other back in the late 50s.
Yes.
We hadn't seen each other since he graduated in 1960, although he was teaching in Lindenhurst all these years. And I taught in Brentwood, and I knew that he was teaching in Lindenhurst. And we hadn't seen each other. We ran into each other, and he's been living in the area, not too far from me, for many years.
Right.
So that was interesting.
You mentioned before where you grew up. I want to ask you, this is a bizarre question. Do you remember the room where you slept as a kid?
Oh, yes.
Could you describe it?
Oh, yes. The house was one of 5 houses built in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, in Rockaway, your basement was ground level. You couldn't go down. Okay. So your first floor or main floor was basically where your main floor in a ranch house today isn't in the second floor and so forth. And they were railroad car shaped. In other words, you went from room to room, front to back, except on the second floor that had a hall and the bedrooms after. And I had the back bedroom.
Okay. In the back of the house.
In the back of the house, but I had 2 windows on 2 separate walls, so I had great ventilation.
Yes. Did you decorate your room? Do you remember?
Oh yes, I was an ardent baseball fan, and still am. I mentioned earlier that I had rheumatic fever, and prior to being able to go out, I was bedridden for about 6 or 8 months.
Who was your team back then?
Oh, only one team, and when that team left, it all left for me. That was the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yes.
And I had 2 choices. You know, they would send work home from school. They didn't have home teaching in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I had 2 choices. Of course, no TV. The radio, it was either the soap operas or baseball games, and they played baseball during the day. So I would listen to these baseball games. And then my father brought me this game called Radio Baseball, where you could move them around. And then I started keeping statistics and listening to every game, and became an ardent Dodger fan.
Did you listen to a lot of radio too? Were you?
Oh yes.
Remember the half-hour shows?
Oh yes.
Every afternoon.
Well, you had the half-hour shows. The Green Hornet, the Lone Ranger was another one. These were mainly 15-minute shows, as I recall. 15 minutes.
Right,
but the interesting thing is, we as kids with Tom Hicks was Captain Midnight, because we all had to get the ring, the coded ring. And then we'd go out after dinner and reenact
the atomic bomb ring.
Right,
in the middle of the 40s when they came with the cereal box.
Right.
Battle Creek, Michigan.
Right.
Everything came from Battle Creek.
Everything from Battle Creek, right. And then we'd go out and reenact the segment.
Oh really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. And I remember we had this big peach tree in the back of our house with a lot of limbs. And I'll tell you, every time we heard about the war news, we hear about the 101st or the 82nd making a parachute drop.
Yes.
You'd have about 10 kids jumping out of that tree, and there'd always be a broken arm, a broken leg. We never stopped, though. We never learned. We had a ball.
You mentioned washing dishes before, but were there any family chores that you were assigned to do?
Oh, sure. I was
the
person at a very early age that got up, shoveled the coal in the coal furnace downstairs, shook the grate, and then hauled the ashes out. And there was an area behind our garage that my father had reserved for ashes, and dumped the barrel before I went to school every day.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. And then in the real ice cold weather, it was my job to take the frozen clothes off the line.
Oh boy, you're bringing back memories of my own at this point. That's right.
Sure.
I suspect a lot of us have those.
Oh,
memories.
I think we all did the same things. Right.
Do you remember your first paying job?
Oh yeah, my first paying job was on the boardwalk in Rockaway, selling as a soda jerk. Making sodas, selling hot dogs, and cans of sodas. Sure.
What about the family holiday that was the most fun for you? Was there one particular holiday, or was there where everybody got together?
I think living at the beach every weekend was a holiday.
Okay.
We had people out every weekend.
Oh boy, I can
until my mother, I remember one time, said I had enough. And at 6 o'clock, she woke the whole family up. We made sandwiches and took off for a weekend.
Yes.
But I remember that Thanksgiving was always a big day for us.
How would you describe yourself as a kid then? What kind of a kid were you?
Well, with a father like I had, you followed the rules. You had no choice. So I was okay. You know, I just an average kid.
Okay.
Did the kids, you know, the
Did
things
you
that all
have
kids did.
Did you have certain toys that you remember that you particularly enjoyed? And when I say toys, I realize that when boys are 10 years old, there are certain kind of toys, and as they get older, when they get to be our age, we have different kinds of toys now.
Right. Well, understand, you'll probably remember this too. My father was, you know, as I said before, a working man.
Yeah.
And during cold weather, there was no work, and especially the years right after World War II, there were a lot of strikes as people were trying to get on track. So I don't know if we were poor or not. Everybody was in the same boat in the neighborhood, and it was a very mixed neighborhood. So we didn't have a lot of toys. We made our toys.
Exactly.
The best thing you can get your hands on were melon crates.
Oh,
what you can do with a melon crate. An old pair of roller skates you could build a scooter with.
Yes.
Find an old baby carriage. No woman would ever leave her mop or broom out on the back because they made great stickball bats.
Yes.
So we made everything we had. I remember I had a secondhand two-wheel bike, which is one of the only bikes in the neighborhood, and everybody rode it.
Uh-huh.
But you know, we didn't have anything. We made it.
That's right. And even the guns that shot little pieces of paper. That
that was the frame of the melon box. You'd cut off about 6 inches on one side, 4 inches on the other. Put a nail in with a rubber band. Pull the rubber band back. Get a piece of cardboard. Fold it in half. And just flick it up. And it traveled quite a distance.
And that was the imagination. And it's like listening to the radio shows too. You had to use your imagination to create all the fun. Everything.
Bottle caps.
Yeah.
We could do a lot of things with bottle caps. Soda bottle caps.
What was the first school you attended?
PS 42 on Beach 66th Street in Rockaway.
Oh. And you have specific memories of the first couple of years there?
Well, I went to kindergarten, and I refused to go back because I wanted to sit in a regular chair, not the little kindergarten chairs, and I refused to go back.
Uh-huh.
So by arrangement, I don't know what kind of arrangement my mother made, I went back, went to school, and started the first grade in January. Remember they had half years, you know. Right. So I went right into first grade and right up through 8th grade.
Do you remember any of the teachers that you had?
Oh, sure. I remember. I remember my 7th grade English teacher, Mrs. O'Connor, and no, it was Mrs. McKillop. I remember that. Because we had a diagram, a sentence.
Oh, yes.
We learned grammar.
Yes, yes.
And subject and predicate and verb and adverb.
I was talking about that just last week with somebody. Yeah.
And I think I didn't know it at the time, but many years later, when I could sit down and put a sentence together, where did this come from? Yes. You know, I had an effect there. That was followed by our 8th grade English teacher. And then we had a science teacher, Mrs. Schwartz, who I'll never forget. She wore these stiletto heels, or it appeared to be, and it's something we could never do, and definitely can't do today. But anybody with a wise mouth caught her heel on their instep. Left no marks, but a lot of pain.
Oh, Jesus, that's great.
And it was we went up through the 8th grade. In fact, I was in the 8th grade at my 8th grade graduation when they announced the beginning of the Korean War.
Oh.
As I recall, 1950.
1950.
Right.
What school then after the elementary school?
Then I went to Far Rockaway High School for a year.
No middle school, no junior high.
You went
right into
K through 8.
Okay.
And this was the 6-story building.
Yes.
Kindergarten was on the first. Well, the first story was the gym, the cafeteria.
Oh, yes.
So 2nd floor was kindergarten. When you made it to the 7th and 8th grade, you climbed 6 flights every morning. Yes. And again, no basement, so everything. Everything started at ground level. Then I went to Far Rockaway, and that was an interesting thing because.
By the way, before you talk about Far Rockaway, I just want to remember the book Up the Down Staircase.
Yes, in fact, I know I've known Bill Kaufman on Fire Island for many years ago. Yeah.
Because when you talked about those floors, I remember there were
Right.
certain stairs that you used to get up to the top and say,
Well, this was especially true at Far Rockaway. We'd have the staircases
yes.
and the down staircases. And
So go ahead. You were saying.
we used to take a commercial bus, the old green bus lines, and there were two routes you could take. One was on Beach Channel Drive, and they always had the newer buses. But if you walked another couple of blocks down, you can get what we call the old Boulevard, Rockaway Beach Boulevard bus, which is an old gas-driven bus.
Uh-huh.
And we'd pile in there and sit in the back of the bus. Because by the time you got from the 60s down to 25th Street, where the school was located on, you were green from fumes. And of course, we'd walk in, we'd go right to the nurse's office, and they'd ship us right back home again.
Yes.
We had that one down to a science until they figured it.
Have you ever attended any of the reunions from your high school?
Well, in Babylon. I graduated from Babylon High School.
From Babylon. Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
I moved to Babylon my sophomore year.
Favorite teachers from high school?
Favorite teachers from high school? I had a number. One was, his last name was Leonard. I can remember his first name. He was my social studies teacher. We used to call him, I didn't know his first name because his first name to us was rewrite.
Oh.
Everything had to be rewritten.
Okay.
Even when he graded your exams, because we never took a short answer exam with him, everything was essays.
Yes.
He graded your exams, didn't give you a grade until you rewrote it. So he was always known as Rewrite. He was very influential with me. Then I had a chemistry teacher who has since passed away, Dale Wood, and a driver ed teacher who, of course, that was a big thing for us. Take driver ed, learn to drive. And of course, the principal of the school, Cyrus Oyer, who, upon finding out that I went back to my 25th reunion, and he came in from California, and when he found out that not only was I a teacher but an administrator, he sat there and laughed for 20 minutes. He couldn't believe it.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Now, you must have graduated from high school around 55?
54.
54.
54.
Where did you go to college? You stay on the island?
Oh, no, I went to Oneonta.
Oh, you did?
In fact, I went to
Okay.
college and we were in the same classes with Guy DiPietro.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Did you
Guy
do
and I met.
both undergraduate and graduate work up there?
No. I went to Oneonta. Actually, it was interesting. I went to New Paltz for a while after I graduated, and I hated school. So I ended up in the Navy, which is a whole other story.
Okay.
Upon getting out of the Navy, I had a job, and I was thinking about going back to school in the city.
How many years did you put in the Navy?
2 years.
2 years? Okay.
I was lucky. I got drafted into the Navy.
Oh.
These are all interesting side stories. If we
All right.
ever had the time to get into them.
You can go into any of them if you want to. Don't let me stop.
Well, the interesting story, you talk about a memorable experience concerning my father.
Yes.
This has to be the all-time memorable experience. At the time, I hated him for it, but in the long run, it proved more than a good move on his part. He didn't know that I left New Paltz.
Oh.
And I kind of dodged the question, and my mother covered for me.
Yes.
Well, it comes the next September. He takes a day off from work. He found out when I had to go back. And remember, in those days, school, you didn't go back to college until the middle of September. He said, "Are you packed and ready to go? I'll drive you up." "No, I'm not going back." "What do you mean you're not going back?" I said, "I'm not going back. I'm through with college. I have a good job. You got me a good job for the summer." He said, "Consider yourself fired. I want to see your boss this afternoon." And he walked outside. He was a heavy smoker. And he's walking up and down in front of the house. And this is right on Route 109, right, Little East Neck Road, right down a few blocks north of the railroad tracks. And he's pacing for about an hour. He walked into the house and said, "All right, come with me." Now, even though I was 18 and 19 at the time, you didn't argue too much.
No, of course not.
Get in the car, and he drives. "Where are we going?" He said, "You'll find out when we get there." Drives to Bayshore, right on 4th Avenue in Bayshore, between Union Boulevard and Main Street. We stop in front of the storefront, Selective Service.
I'll be damned. Yeah.
We walk inside, and he says to the lady, he, pointing to me, wants to volunteer for the draft.
Wow.
He said, "You're either going back to school this afternoon or you're going into the service, but you're not going to be a bum." Case closed. That was in September. I was gone a few months later. I found out my mother didn't talk to him for 6 months after that.
No, of course, yes.
And I was kind of angry, but when I got down to Whitehall Street, I found out that the Navy was drafting. And I didn't feature marching around with a rifle on my shoulder. So I counted off. They were doing every other person. So I convinced the guy in front of me who was complaining, hoping that he wouldn't go into the Navy. He wouldn't go into the Army, wanted to go into the Navy because he had bad feet or whatever, that he was due to go into the Army. If he would switch with me, we would end up where we wanted to go. Well, we come down, he gets stamped Army, he goes to the right, I get stamped Navy, I go to the left. I never saw the guy again.
Yes.
And I was gone. I was
Yes.
in the Navy.
Yes.
And then when I got out of the Navy, I received a couple of letters from my sister who was at Oneonta, telling me what a great place it was, what a great time. Why don't you come on up? So I went up. Next thing I knew, I was registering for the spring semester.
That's a great story. And then you met Guy.
Guy and I met at registration. We were on the same line for D&E, and we registered together. He was a social studies major, so was I. And we pretty much took the same courses for the next 3 years, although he was a fanatic studying. Funny story, Guy had gotten married in his junior year, I think it was, and they had an apartment. He married a Brentwood girl, Roseanne Scavo, who was in the first, I think, graduating class of Brentwood High School.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
And the family was from Brentwood.
Okay.
And we were all giant football fans, So he would invite us up to watch the game. And if the game was over, let's say at 4 o'clock, by 4:05, we were all out of that apartment because he was back to studying. Of course, we all went downtown and had a few beers and partied some more on that Sunday. But he really put, went to the grindstone.
Now, when you finished at Oneonta, you did both graduate and undergraduate?
No, I came down and went to Queens College.
And then you went to Queens.
Yeah, by the time I graduated from Oneonta, I was married.
Oh, I see.
And in fact, I had a child at that time. And my wife who had passed away in 1974. In fact, she taught in Brentwood for a while too. Was teaching in Freeport. So I came down, got the job in Brentwood, and started graduate school at Queens College.
And that's where you got.
That's where there, and then I got my administrative work at Hofstra.
So then you came to Brentwood for the first time in the 50s.
I came to Brentwood in 1961.
61.
I graduated I started at Oneonta in 58, in January 58, and graduated in June of 61. And
I have to ask this: how did you hear about Brentwood, or what made you come to Brentwood at that time? Was it Guy? Was the fact?
No, Guy. In fact, Guy didn't come for another 3 years.
Yeah, right.
There was a listing of school districts
that were
looking, that we knew were looking for teachers, and we applied. I had a job set up for me in another district through family influence, and I decided I wanted to go out on my own. I've always been, somewhat of an independent person, so I decided to check out and look for myself. So I came to Brentwood, and Brentwood was unique. I met.
Who did you meet? Yeah,
I met Lenny Sachs. Remember Lenny Sachs?
Yes, I do.
Who's quite a talker.
Yes,
and he sold me on Brentwood. Okay. And went through a series of interviews, and I didn't hear anything. For about 2 or 3 weeks, and I was getting a little nervous.
Tell me, when you say you went through a series of interviews, it was with Lenny Sachs.
Lenny Sachs, I think Ray Sheely. Was involved. Yes. Gene Hoyt. Lee Stewart.
All right. Yes.
All right. Names from the past.
Absolutely.
And we'll let you know, which is usually. And I didn't hear anything, so one day I just sat down and I wrote letters to a number of school districts that I was interested in. Wanting to know what the status of my application was. About 3 or 4 days later, I get a telegram from Gene Hoyt, and I still have it. Do not sign any other contracts. Contract on the way.
Okay.
So a contract arrived about 2 days after that. I signed it, and I've been.
Was there 31 years in Brentwood, or any situation in any one of those interviews that you went through that comes back to you?
I got hung up. I was just talking on Jacksonian democracy. Okay. I had one whole interview that was based on my perception of Jacksonian democracy and what I thought the word historiography meant. Remember those days?
I certainly do.
Brings back some memories, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. What about your first impressions of the town when you got here? And
I knew Brentwood because I lived in the area.
Okay.
And I had friends in Brentwood.
Yes. Okay.
And I knew, Fifth Avenue was a 2-lane highway. Candlewood. I remember when Candlewood Road leading to South Junior was a dirt road.
Really?
So-
Okay. Yeah. Now, when you first, all right, so you get your contract in the mail and
Right.
you show up for work. What were you doing? What were you assigned to do?
I was assigned as a social studies teacher at South Junior High,
Mm-hmm. Teaching
eighth and ninth grade
eighth and ninth
social
grade.
studies.
Okay.
And I remember we had a mass orientation. Now at South Junior alone had 38 new teachers that year,
Yeah.
because that was the year that North Junior opened.
Uh-huh.
And there were we met up here at the Ross Auditorium, which was the only auditorium at the time. Oh, maybe 200, 250 new teachers in the district.
Yes.
And we had this orientation, and then you reported after lunch to your building. And I remember who I walked in. I walked into the building with Tom Dwyer.
Okay.
And I guess we were the first ones there at the time. And South Junior had an infamous secretary.
Is that right?
Yes, yes. And Stella Nash, who ruled that school with an iron hand.
Okay.
And I remember Tom and I was standing by the counter, and she was talking to somebody. And I remember banging on the table, saying, if that teacher doesn't shape up this year, he's gone. At first, I thought she was the principal, but then I knew Mike DeBellis became the principal.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And
That's
she
great.
ran that front office
That's
with an
great.
iron hand. And don't forget, this was the early '60s.
That's
Things
right,
were
sure.
much different than they
Oh,
are today.
absolutely.
But we had a very interesting faculty with 38 new teachers.
Did you remember some of the people that were there with you that year?
Oh, yes.
Who else was there with you?
Well, I mentioned Tom
Yes.
Dwyer. Hal Sabatko taught next door to me.
Uh-huh.
Marge Jones
Okay, yes.
was there. Joe Basso.
Sure enough.
Ralph Schneider was there. Warren Walker. Dick Rothenberg. Norm Gurian. Phys Ed. Remember we had a phys ed teacher by the name of she taught the girls phys ed, Doris Latimer. You could hear her voice from one end of the building to the other. And of course, getting older, names. I remember the faces, but names slip my mind.
Got a great memory. But and here's something that for sure you'll remember. Do you remember what you paid the first year?
Yes. Not only do I remember the yearly salary, but I remember what I took home every 2 weeks.
Is that right?
The yearly salary was $5,000, which, by the way, was one of the reasons I came to Brentwood. Was my other job offers were for 46 or 48.
Yes.
And I was married at the time. $200 meant a lot.
Yes.
That's $5 a week, roughly. After taxes, Social Security, and we paid a good part of our health insurance, even though it wasn't an awful lot, and the 8% to the retirement system.
That's right.
I took home $142 and some change every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. Yes.
And
then you went to your second job.
then we went to graduate school. We went to our second job. And the first thing you found out was that the greatest things going was they paid $350 to coach a major sport in a junior high. So for the second year, I was able to coach football, which was great because we got the money all at one time. And you didn't have to worry about Christmas presents or any of that for the holiday season. So we coached, home taught. You remember in 1959, they started the evening high school. Jack Zuckerman and I split a social studies class for a number of years. He taught one semester and I taught the other so we could both have an opportunity. Wherever there was a buck, we were there to make it. And then you had a second job off and out of school. I was fortunate. I had a great summer job for many years.
What was that?
I was a policeman in Ocean Beach.
Is that right?
From 1962 to 1973. I was and that was another one of those jokes that started. We were sitting around the faculty room one day, and we were talking about summer jobs. And somebody said, they're giving an exam for seasonal police officer for Suffolk County Police. Had them at the time was they had just formed, and the State Park Police, and a number of teachers.
Oh, I remember.
Let's go take the exam. So we go take the exam, and we passed it.
Yes,
I passed it also, and I didn't really think I was going to do anything with it, because the summer before that I had a job as a good humor man with, he was the girls or the boys fencing coach here for many years. He retired. I can't remember his name.
Boys
fencing coach, yeah. Not
Brown?
Wolf.
No,
yeah.
Brown. Yeah.
Dave Brown.
Dave Brown, yeah.
And lo and behold, the chief of police in Brentwood was a Brentwood resident. Family grew up in, actually his wife grew up in Brentwood. His son was in my class. And his son went home and told him about this tough teacher he has, you know, and that he stood for no nonsense, but he was nice to the kids, but you just couldn't push him and all of this. And the next thing I know, I get a phone call. Would I be interested in being a seasonal police officer? Well, how much did it pay? And, you know, I remember he said it paid something like $19 a day. Oh, this is great for the summer.
Oh, you bet.
So I went over to Ocean Beach on a blustery April day. Went through a series of interviews. Next thing I know, I got a call. And that job turned out to be a great job because I worked for many years. I worked a lot during the off season on weekends. So it really, you know, helped myself and my family.
I thought until recently that the days of teachers having second jobs were over until I traveled out in the New York area and found that teachers are still
they still do this.
doing the same
but
thing.
You know, we were hungry, and it was just a matter of cost.
Yeah.
You know, there were some great things. We had some great times at
For sure.
at South. You know, we were all basically new teachers, so we'd have a party every month.
Wasn't George Klein involved?
George Klein was there for a little bit. Yeah. We'd have a party every month, and one of the teachers let us use her basement, and we chip in, and it was one of those things, bring your own bottle kind of thing.
Sure.
And for very little, you know, at most it would cost you a babysitter, and we'd have that party. And the other thing, and the young teachers today don't realize this, even teachers that have been around for 20 years don't remember, but when we reported to school, we were given an assignment sheet, you probably remember this, which listed our chaperone duties for the year.
That's right.
Remember that?
Yes.
And we were required to chaperone.
Sure.
Well, in those days, with 2 junior highs and no activities in the community, we had a dance for the kids every month. And we were assigned to chaperone at least 2 of those dances. Well, it'd be maybe 15 teachers chaperoning. Well, we turned those things into a social event because that was another way for us to get out with our wives or significant others to save money. You know, we'd all meet, go to a diner, come chaperone the dance. We'd all dance, then go out for a little drink afterwards.
Yes.
And it became a very enjoyable night. And then, of course, somebody got the idea we should be paid for them.
Yes.
Well, actually, we had more fun not being paid.
Isn't that interesting? Yes.
You know, some of the progress we made really wasn't progress in my eyes.
Were you also involved with? You talked about chaperoning with, like, their class advisors and clubs.
I was the student council advisor.
You were, okay.
I was coach football.
Yeah.
I 1 year, as a joke, this was really funny. I was sitting outside of Mike DeBellis' office, and he was in his office with the then athletic director. I guess had been teaching 7 or 8 years. And they were looking for a girls' field hockey coach. And I was getting tired of coaching football, but I couldn't give it up, you know. So I said, for 2 cents, I'll coach it. And 2 pennies came flying out of his office. Next thing I know, I'm not coaching football. I'm coaching girls. I don't know anything about girls' field hockey. But my first wife was an all-Nassau County field hockey player.
Oh.
So what we did is I took a whole bunch of sticks home, and she'd get all the kids in the neighborhood in our backyard and teach me everything for the next day's practice. Plus, I had a couple of the girls on the high school varsity team, and since they were on split session, their practices were early. They would come down and help me. And you know, we had an undefeated season that year.
Isn't that wonderful? Yes.
It's one of my fond experiences.
And you were 1 chapter ahead of the kids.
You're right. I was 1 chapter. Gosh. But the kids, they used to love to come down. And I always make the mistake, you know, when you coach football, you stand on the field.
Yes.
Well, field hockey, you don't do that because they come down. They like to take that little swipe with that stick. I used to have bruised chins. But then I had another awakening as a field hockey coach, that it's the responsibility of the coach to serve hot chocolate to the teams after the match was over. So I had to go into the home ec room with my hot chocolate, make pots of hot chocolate, and serve to both teams afterwards. That was a unique and fun experience.
How did you make the transition then from the classroom and from the field into the administrative?
I used to, you know, in those days we all helped. The schools, you know, were very crowded.
Yeah.
It was funny. I think I had cafeteria duty every year for about the first 8 or 9 years that I worked.
That's because you were good at it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was good at it. And, we had cafeterias were fun.
Yes.
In fact, I'm still looking for the kid that called me Marty for a whole year. Never found him. But anyway, I then decided to take the courses for administration. And so, Mike DeBellis was a unique human being and who was always there to help everybody. I've never met a people person.
What a nice thing to be
Nicer.
able to say, yes, about somebody.
He is a true humanitarian. And he would take you under his wing and do anything he could. So he said, I'll give you some experiences.
Great, yeah.
And experiences, and I was at, instead of the cafeteria, I helped in the office with some discipline, how we all
Yes, sure.
did this. And we more or less grew into the position. There were, although at about that time, a formal internship program was coming into effect. Before that, we were getting a better internship experience because, at least in my case, and the people that became administrators from South, and quite a few people did, because of what Mike was able to do for us. If he spotted anybody with talent, he pushed them along and nurtured.
Mm-hmm.
Today, to this day, he's still one of my favorite people.
What a wonderful thing to be able to say about him well after the fact.
Yes.
So eventually, anyway, you became.
I became an administrator, and I went to East Junior.
Was there an organization at the time that you became an administrator? Was there a BIPSO?
Oh yeah, there was a BIPSO. But one interesting story. Let's go back to BTA.
Yes.
When it was the Brentwood Teachers Association, before it was involved with NICET, before it was a union.
Were you involved?
I was involved in my second year. Again, I never mind being a risk taker.
Good, yeah.
And my second year, my second or third, I think it was my tenure year. My tenure year.
Wow.
I remember Charlie Gray. Remember Charlie
Yes.
Gray? He was the president, and he asked me if I would serve as salary committee chairman. Now, up until that time, for the previous umpteen years, the board, no matter how you negotiated, would grant a $200 across-the-board raise. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
$200. So we formed the salary committee, and we started to move. We had some good people. And then we had Joe Basso, Ruth Rosenthal.
These were on the negotiating.
We were that negotiating team, and a number of other people that I couldn't recall. Well, our goal was not so much to get a bigger raise in terms of across the board, but to get a lump sum amount in addition that we can spread. And we were pushing for this. And the night that came about, I was home, and I lived in Merrick at the time. We had a house in Merrick. And I lived in Merrick at the time, and about 12:30 at night, in the morning, I got a call from Gene Hoyt. If you guys want to negotiate, be here in an hour. Negotiate with the board.
Wow.
The board president at that time was Ed Sonderling. And if you ever had to deal with Ed Sonderling,
Never knew the man.
He was he makes Giuliani look like a liberal.
Really.
Well,
he was the post office.
He was the water commissioner.
Water commissioner.
Water commissioner.
Oh, I thought he was with the post office.
No, he was the water commissioner.
Okay.
I called my committee, and of course I got a lot of angry comments from spouses and so forth. We met, and we negotiated, and by about 4:30 in the morning, they agreed to give us an additional $40,000 for the whole unit. If we, at 9 o'clock in the morning, could report back to Gene Hoyt's office with a plan on how the money would be dispersed.
Oh, my goodness.
We adjourned to Ruth Rosenthal's house and worked through the night.
That is cruel and inhuman treatment.
Wait a second.
Oh.
We worked through the night, and we put together a package. Now, we spread the money only where there were teachers. Okay. And I remember, some people got more than others. If you had a master's degree by then, and I was still working on mine at the time, and if you had more longevity, we had people, we had some old timers in the district that were there 7 or 8 years, and a few more. We were an old timer at that time. Because I never thought I'd survive 7 years. I was impressed
Yes.
with somebody
There
there
was a
that long.
tremendous turnover of
Right.
teachers in those days.
But also with the hiring of so many
Yes.
new teachers.
Yes.
We got back to Gene's office about 8:00, 8:30, with a presentation that he thought he could present to the board. And we asked him if we can get subs for the day. And he said no. The board was expressed that we will not have subs. So we all went back to our school. And we had been up since at least 12:30 the night before. We taught, then went home and went to bed. And of course, I was sleeping about 2 hours when I got a call that the board will accept. And we had a salary agreement. And I remember my raise that year went from $200 to $240.
My goodness.
And that was the first breakthrough to get us off and the next year.
Just for the history's sake, what year would that have been?
I think that was 1963.
Okay. Now, this is before NYSET. This
Before,
is before
yeah.
NYSET.
And the next year, I think it was 64.
Yeah.
60. I think it was 63. Then 2 years later, Guy came into the district and he asked if he could serve on the salary committee. And I said, Guy, you can have it.
Yes.
I've had it.
Yes.
It was tough, and I
Yes.
moved to another committee.
Yes.
It was a strain. It was like, again, working extra jobs, going to school.
Sure.
But we were young and we didn't know any better. And we had fun.
I know. Yes.
But that was the first break away from that. And that would be my significant contribution to BTA.
And then you also became active in BIPSO.
Later on, I became active in BIPSO. I became president during the 80s on 2 occasions. I became president in 82, after the 82-83 year.
Mm-hmm.
And we negotiated a 5-year contract. And that was very interesting because 5-year contracts were unheard of. And, the Taylor law, as I recall, it was explicit that a contract's for 3 years unless both parties agree. Mm-hmm. And Guy wanted a long-term contract. Yes. And, of course, remember, inflation was running rampant in those days.
Yes.
So we were very much concerned, but we had a codicil in that contract that allowed for a great renegotiation during the 3rd year of the contract that allowed us to move that maximum raise way up based on the inflation rate and the average salary of 10 other school districts at that time on Long Island.
Now, you said a Guy wanted a long-term. Guy was superintendent.
He was superintendent at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I agreed with the long-term.
Yes.
I felt, too, that, we spent too much time with labor relations when those energies could well be spent working with youngsters, working with curriculum, working in the schools. Yeah. And as you know, enforcing a contract is a whole other ball game.
Absolutely.
But we had a very good contract, and that became a new model. Although my predecessors, people like Pete Demento and Dave Martz and Andy Levito, I guess, from the early years. They had some great contracts that started during the 70s when BIPSO got started.
Were there certain times in your career where you look back, you say, yes, I got more involved after such and such a time or after such and such an incident in my life? Or was it just an evolution?
I got involved, I've always had a life outside of school.
Very important, isn't it?
And and around 1969, I had a feeling, in those days, in the early days, you taught 1 or 2 years and you were an administrator. And here I'm moving along and I'm not, in that cycle. So I thought it may never happen. So I decided, well, I like Brentwood. It's a unique district. And to this day, with my current job that I'm in virtually every school district on the island, I still wouldn't have changed and left Brentwood. So I got involved with community organization, the Lions Club. And I've been a member ever since. And I've been, it's 28 years now that I've been an active member. And during that period, before I became an administrator, I was very involved on a district level, which is all of Suffolk County. So I had another life outside of school, besides my summer job, besides continuing to take courses and working in Brentwood. When I became an administrator, and shortly after that, Linda, my first wife, passed away, I became a single parent.
Okay.
And I did that for 7 years until I met Eva. And I think it's my greatest achievement in life. And I'll tell this to everybody and anybody at any time, bringing up at the time, an 11-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. And for the next 7 years, I did it. Did all of the things that any
Mother and father.
mother and father. And in those days, it wasn't fashionable
That's right.
for fathers to be bringing up children.
That's right.
But we did it, and as I said earlier, my children are very successful. And that, I think, is the greatest achievement of my life. I became less active outside of my own personal things. I coached Little League.
Yeah,
I was involved with some of my daughter was involved with
Priorities
music
again.
and all of that, but still involved.
Sure.
And then became re-involved. We got involved with BIPSO, and then re-involved when I retired with community service. Now I run a full gamut of things that I do.
Which leads me to the next question, and that is, you retired in
92.
92.
Right.
Of all of your professional accomplishments, what are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? The last job that I had in Brentwood, and that was principal of the evening high school, adult education, and summer high school. And I think one way to sum it up was a comment that my son made at dinner one night. There sits my father. He lives for all the failures in Brentwood.
Wow.
And when you walk out on that field, or at least when I walked out on a field, and I know Charlotte Deschamps feels the same way at graduation, and you have people getting their diplomas, and you know how hard they worked,
Yes.
and what their lives were like.
Yes.
There's no feeling greater. There's no feeling of satisfaction when an 82-year-old man gets his GED and scores a perfect score on the math. Wow. You can't beat that. When we became the primary source for the educational component on the Immigration Reform Act of 1986, in fact, there were 1,200 eligible people in Suffolk County, and we provided the program for almost 900 of them.
Wow.
And when you have people getting their green cards after all of these years,
yes.
and passing those tests and getting their citizenship. And of course, it goes with the stories.
I'm sure.
The young ladies who were pregnant and came back. I don't know if you knew, I used to go around the district stealing all the old secretaries' chairs.
No.
Because so they can come in during the last few months and roll them down to the class and sit in a chair. We had a supply of chairs. They would come in, and they would come back and they'd save their absences, and I'd give them an extra absence. And it was to give them 3 weeks to deliver the baby. And they would come back to school and get that diploma. And there were times we found babysitters for them. There were many stories.
Yes.
I think the most humorous story, and I tell this to people, is I had it was one afternoon, or I was in my office, and my secretary at the time called and said, "There's a young lady out here who doesn't go to evening high school, but she has to see you. She's hysterical." I'll send her in. She comes in. My secretary comes in with her, holding a box of tissues. And all the young lady can say to me was, "How can you do this to me? How could you do this to me?" I said, "Do what to you?" "Allow my mother to come to the prom." I said, "Wait, what do you mean your mother coming to the prom?" She said, "You told my mother she can come to the prom." Then it dawned on me. A few weeks before, a woman walked up to me and said, she was graduating. She was an evening high school student. Of course, an older woman,
Yes.
older in her early. I would say if she was 40, she was old, And she said that she came back to school, that she left school to have a child before she graduated, and that her husband always promised her that if she got her diploma, he would take her to the prom.
Right.
I thought that was wonderful.
Yes.
I said, "I'll make the arrangements."
Yes.
And I called Gary Mintz,
Yes.
and no problem. We'll have her come to the prom. She could sit with the adults,
Yes.
All she wanted to do was show up there for 20 minutes even.
Yes.
So she could say she went to her high school prom. Her daughter found out about this, and she was a graduating senior who was going to the prom also. Like, we convinced the daughter that her mother would not interfere, and that I would talk to her mother, and you know how big Brentwood proms are. She wouldn't even see her
not
mother
even
there.
Contact, right?
And we calmed them down, and I said, "I have one bit of more news for you. Your mother will follow you up to the stage to get her diploma at graduation." But that's one of the more humorous stories. But there are a lot of heartwarming stories with people getting their diplomas and getting into college. And Jerry Cohn and I would, who worked the guidance for me, we would pull all kinds of magic all legitimate magic,
Sure.
but getting people into schools
Yes.
and getting them on with their lives.
You had a ball.
I did. I
Why
enjoyed
did you
myself.
retire in that?
You know, when I was a young teacher, I said, there are so many things to do in life, and I wanted to do them all.
Mm.
So I told my family that I was thinking about leaving Brentwood when I was 55, and it was financially,
Mhm.
we were able to. And I would like to try some other things. Well, Eva's comment was, you're not going to try sitting home and becoming a house husband,
Yes.
because we would never survive that. I said, no, I can't. So I made a list. I was about 51 years old. And I made a list of all the things that I would like to do, no matter how ridiculous they are. All right. And then, of course, you go through this list. And this list was lengthy. In fact, working for the School Administrators Association at conferences, I do workshops on retirement with two other colleagues, on everything else but the financial end, on the quality of life in retirement.
Yes.
This is one of the things that I suggest that you do
Mhm.
at about the time you're 50.
Mhm.
Well, one of the things, being a social studies teacher, you take your kids to all the historical sites, and they've been to them all to the point that they didn't want to go.
Yes.
In fact, they would never ask me a question about social studies. My answers were too long. And one of the things my kids always used to tell me, when you retire, you can get a job as a tour guide. Well, we had been members of the South Street Seaport, because I was interested, and I always loved to go down there.
Uh-huh.
And I'm reading the Journal one day, and they're looking for volunteers. So I made a call, and I went in. I was still teaching. And I said, Eva's she was going back to graduate school, and she needed time to get work done. And Sundays libraries were open. It's a great time. In fact, she was going to Hofstra at the time. She got her CAS there. This was before she became a librarian.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go in and work as a docent at the Seaport on Sundays as a tour guide.
Really?
And I'm still doing that. Now I do it on Thursdays.
Damn, that's great.
Sometimes I take a year off, on and off, but I enjoy being down there with the ships. In fact, yesterday, I wandered on my touring around the Peking, and I'm sure everybody knows the big ship, the Peking. I found a small class that got tickets, a teacher and her students from Jersey, from Lawrence, I think it was Lawrenceville, New Jersey, a 6th grade class, 2 chaperones. And for somehow or other, they didn't make arrangements with the education department. See, I don't work in the education department. They're too rigid.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
And I got together with these kids, and I started to talk to them. My way of talking to junior high kids, even though these are a little younger. And we made a connection. And I spent the next hour and a half going through the ships, talking to them in the language that they understand. Not going too deeply into too many things, talking about the human interest kinds of things that kids love.
Yes.
I spent an hour and a half. It was great.
Oh, I'll bet.
And I could do that anytime I want. I'm pretty much on my own with that. And I meet all kinds of people from all over the world. It's very interesting. The Peking, after its service was over as a sailing ship in 1932, became a school ship for orphan boys in England, and it was on the Medway River in southwest England. And I've met a couple of young. One was of course, really aren't young, but one I met a container ship captain a number of years ago, and he was sitting and staring at the ship, and I have my pager keeps going off. So I went over and talked to him, as I usually do. And he told me he grew up on that ship. And only a few months ago, a fellow came through, and he lived on the ship in 1973. The last year it was in operation as a school ship before we purchased it, and the school was built ashore. Right. And it was very interesting. Another interesting thing, I was on the Ambrose, which is the light ship, and everybody remembers the Ambrose, one day. And a fellow comes on board, and he said, he says, I served on one of these in 1950 in San Francisco Bay. And he said, this is a funny story. He said, this young Coast Guardsman, 17-year-old kid, comes on board, and he had a sea bag, he had a set of golf clubs, and he had 2 big cardboard boxes that weighed a ton. And he came on board, And he said the cardboard boxes contained golf balls. And on his off hours, he would drive golf balls into San Francisco Bay.
For goodness sake.
That was Arnold Palmer.
Wow.
And so you hear so many interesting stories.
Yeah.
Another interesting story, the Waiver Tree, which was used as a storage ship in the Straits of Magellan in Argentina for many years. And I met an Argentine couple, who told me that they sailed right past the Waiver Tree on their honeymoon in the Straits of Magellan.
You've got to meet hundreds and hundreds of interesting people.
Interesting people from all. I met a couple of English sailors that lived on the Peking during World War II when it was used as a barrack ship. I've met interesting people from all over the world.
Imagine if you hadn't retired, you would have missed all these opportunities to do all these wonderful.
Well, that's what I mean, and that's just one thing I do.
What was it, to just go back to the working? I mean, to the working years. No, you know what, Marty? I think you've answered this question when I asked you before what you were most proud of. I was going to say what gave you the most pleasure during all the years that you were working. You've probably answered that.
Evening high school.
The evening high school.
Evening program.
Yeah.
Because there are so many people out there that have gotten a second chance.
Now, you've said also, and I just want to make sure that I understood you correctly, that you've answered this question as well. If you had your life to do over again, is there anything you would have done differently? I think you've answered that very clearly before, but maybe not. So
I don't know. I'm not so sure I would do anything differently. You know, I'm a throwback to that old Frank Sinatra song, "My Way."
Yes, yes.
And I pretty much do it my way within the system. I found the formula to make that work.
Yes, yes.
And I did many things, and I've lived a very good life.
Is there anything about it that you think you're going to miss, or that you have already noticed that you missed about the active years of working? Well,
I miss my colleagues.
Okay.
But many of my colleagues are retired, and they've all gone their own way, and I run into them. I had the opportunity to play golf with Ralph Ruggiero Friday at the Air Force Association golf outing. I see Joe Silva quite a bit, and I run into Pete Demento. I run into quite a few of my colleagues that are still in the area.
Was there something that you would like to have accomplished that you weren't able to get to, or that there wasn't time, or?
You know, I never really thought about that, or have given that much thought. What would I have liked to accomplish? I think if I had to say, pick anything, and I think maybe this is it. If I could have had more of an impact on doing away with some of the negative feelings that our colleagues have developed over the years, and developing a closer relationship between BTA and BIPSO. That I actually actively work for, and I've had a good relationship with the BTA leaders, and I would have liked very much to see a much more closer collegial relationship. And that would be my disappointment if that didn't happen.
Waxing a little bit philosophical here, what changes? Even though we've both been away from it now for 6 years or thereabouts, do you see change? What kind of changes do you see ahead in the immediate future for public schools? Certainly, you're still aware.
I'm very active. First of all, we have a tremendous need of labor on Long Island, and I mean educated, trained labor on Long Island. One of my jobs, one of my duties with SANES, School Administrators Association, as I represent SANES with the Long Island Coalition for Education, which is a consortium of all of the education groups, superintendents, board members, NICE, PTA. In fact, our co-chairs are Bruce Brodsky from the School Boards Association and John DiGregorio from NICE, which is great. And we've agreed to disagree, and we've agreed to only work on and we work closely with the Long Island Association. And there is a need to raise that bar. But we also have a great need to provide a realistic education for those youngsters that aren't blessed with all of the intelligence and all of the talent that is needed, so that they can become part of our workforce. make a great contribution. When I see, I was at a scholarship meeting, scholarship awards in another school district, and they did something very interesting. They gave out the scholarships, the PTAs and SEPTA gave out the scholarships, and they mixed the SEPTA scholarships in with the PTA. They didn't label these kids. And those are the kinds of, I picked right up on that. I said, this is wonderful.
Yes.
We need to do more of this because not every kid is going to go to college.
Of course.
We need to provide an environment for them so that they can be successful and enjoy a good life. And there are things out there. But as public education, we have to rise to the occasion and meet the needs of all students, not the students on each end of the spectrum. And that's another one of my disappointments, that if I can change it. As I said, I was very active at the Seaport. I'm very active with the Babylon Lions Club. I will be inducted as first vice president. I edit our monthly newsletter, Lions Raw, which has a circulation of 125. It goes all over places all over the country, which keeps the club up on its news. We have 90 active members. I'm on scholarship committees. I've been involved with the golf outing as chairman. And you talk about the effect you have on your children. Yeah. My son, who is 31, has recently become a member, and I will have the pleasure of inducting him on the latter part of this month. And when my father retired, he became a member in Mastic Shirley, and I inducted him. Oh. And so this is going to be the third generation. This is going to be a great pleasure.
A tradition now.
A pleasure for me to do. And in fact, my daughter said, "Well, I'm going to have to get involved too." So that's interesting. I'm also a courier for the Lions Eye Bank at North Shore Hospital. I deliver cornea. If I receive a call, I will pick up the cornea, whether it be at the hospital or at the airport, and deliver it to another hospital. We do this for two reasons: A, it saves money, and B, it guarantees the cornea getting there. And I have made 30 trips in the last couple of years, which means approximately 50 to 60 people were able to see the next day. And you know what kind of a feeling it is? When you deliver that little styrofoam box to the operating room of a hospital. And I've been so involved with the eye bank that this past January I was elected to the board of directors, which has lay people and doctors and hospital personnel. And I'm on the board of directors, and we go around visiting hospitals, nurses as part of the training in the workshop. And from time to time, I make the visit with the hospital, the nurses from the eye bank as a member of the board of directors. And
go ahead.
I got involved with the Boy Scouts. I've been on a nominating committee and the Good Deed Awards committee and a district committee member for the Great South Bay District, which is everything from West Islip through to Amityville on the South Shore.
It's a wonder that you can find time to do all of this.
And I play golf one morning a week with some friends. I get up every morning, and there's always something to do. I'm usually behind schedule. While we were sitting here, my pager from Sandy's has gone off 3 different times, which means there are 3 calls that I'm going to have to return as soon as I get back. So it's been a lot of fun. But there are a lot of things to do in this whole world of community service. As I mentioned earlier, I was at another school district. We present a scholarship in a number of school districts from our club, and this one was in West Islip. And we presented a scholarship to a young lady who, and 50% of the scholarship is based on community service, and also a good portion on scholarship. And she has over 90 average and all. And she's done a lot of community service, including spending the last 4 years building houses for Habitat for Humanity, and a very dedicated person to the community. And we do this in Babylon, among our very many activities. You'll even see me out in front of Kmart during the Christmas season ringing the bell for the Salvation Army. We ring the bell for the Salvation Army. And if you come to the Babylon Country Fair and the week after Labor Day, you'll see me cooking bratwurst all day. I've cooked over 750 bratwurst a day out there when we're doing that.
It certainly is no exaggeration to say that once you enter the world of retirement, you become part of this nation's social capital, and that's really...
Well, I have a role model.
And
I'm very proud to...
And who's that?
My role model is my 83-year-old father-in-law, Eva's father, who has visited Brentwood High School and done talks on the Holocaust. was a victim of the Holocaust himself. But he's 83 years old, and he works with the Food Bank of Western New York, and they distribute over 1 million pounds of food a month. And he does a lot of fundraising and a lot of, and he does a tremendous amount of work. He works basically full time, and he was named a number of years ago Man of the Year.
Really?
And one of the health-related organizations just notified him that he was nominated for a senior volunteer of the year for Western New York. I think he has a dinner or luncheon to go to when they do the Academy Awards presentation.
What a family!
And he's out there, and my mother-in-law, who's about 80 herself. One time I was visiting them, and I asked her where she was going. She said, "I'm going to the Senior Citizen Center." And she likes to dabble in art. And I said, "Oh, you're taking another art course?" Yeah. She said, "No, I serve lunches to the old folks." I said, "Wait a second, this time she was about 78. I said, "You're the old folks." She's, "No, these are people 67, 68, 69. Yeah, I served them their lunch, So she's out there volunteering and doing her thing too. And she just received her 15-year award for doing this. Great. So there is a role model in the family.
Looks like we're all serving. Sure.
Yeah, and
is there any question that I forgot to ask you, Brian?
I don't know, but it's one thing I want to say, and I want to get this message out to any retired member and active member. And as you can see by the last few minutes of this tape, I'm really into this community service. I got a lot from Brentwood over the years, and I'm giving back to the community. There's a whole area of my life where I didn't talk about, which is a whole other story. But in my way, I'm giving back to the community, and this is how this country and our society is going to survive. It's not dogma. It's not a fundamentalist idea running around that we have to live by. It's about people giving of themselves and asking for very little in return and having fun doing it. And one of the beautiful things about volunteering, you can pick and choose what you want to do.
You're the boss.
You're the boss, and it's so much fun. And I encourage everybody. And those of you that will see this in your 20s and 30s, start now. Start now.
Good advice.
It is wonderful.
There is a question that I remember Eva asked me to ask from this point on of everyone. And it occurs to me that I want to ask you the question. To identify, if you can, one of the most important books that you've ever read. One of the books that had a profound effect on your life. You see, she wants to augment the library here with those kinds of books that we can recommend.
There are a number of books.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book that we look at when bad things happen to good people.
Yes.
Which has been influential.
It's Rabbi Kirshner.
But there's a book that I read recently, written by Colin Powell. Because that book, if nothing else, tells every young person in this country that you can be whatever it is you want to be. When you make up your mind to do it, you can excel. And when you focus, set your goals realistic, and work hard, you can be anything you want. And of course, over a long life, I read many books, but I read that book when it came out. And that, there are times a book really sticks with you.
Sure.
And there's so much of his life, look, he's our age.
Yes.
And so much of his life paralleled our lives.
Absolutely.
Except for the military, And it's amazing that it's true. When you make up your mind, set those goals, and work hard, it will happen. It will happen. No matter what the setbacks are, keep going straight ahead and be honest to yourself. I heard this past Friday night. You can never be honest with anybody unless you're honest with yourself. And be honest with yourself. I'm going to ask you to you've been giving advice to many of the young people that are listening, but what about the young teachers, the people who are just beginning? Is there something that you could offer as advice to them? Yes. Remember, the glass is always half full.
Yeah.
Approach each day with a positive outlook. Approach each class. And even though you know that somewhere in that class, Johnny is going to present a problem, approach it as if it's day one. and you will find a very rewarding career.
Marty, I can't thank you enough for the time and for your commitment, not just for today, but for many, many years of commitment to Brentwood and to people who live and work here. Thanks so much
Oh,
for
it's
being
my
with us.
pleasure. Nice meeting with you and being part of this.